Welcome back, Wolfpack. Verlis here to a facts, stats, trivia, and a top 10 for the poison typing. So the poison typing is going to look really crazy defensively. That tons of resistances, fighting, poison, bug, grass, and in the 6th generation, a little bit of a buff by resisting fairy types and hitting them super effective. However, we only have 2 weaknesses. And one of them's pretty big. Having ground weakness, fairly substantial. A lot of Pokemon carry that Earthquake. A lot of very reliable ground damage out there. And every once in a while, you're just going to encounter that Psychic typing. Normally not a problem, but Poison types are fairly worried by it. And offensively, it's kind of the same thing. We resist a whole lot of types as a Poison typing, but we also are resisted by quite a few as well. Poison, Ground, Rock, and Ghost, and we're also completely immune by Steel, and we don't really have too many super effectives. Actually, in the 5th generation, it was pretty bad. Only Grass, but then we also have Fairy, so, you know, we're not there to get this huge offensive coverage, but we can soak up some hits, and there is a lot of predictability right there, because Ground, well, Flying and Levitate Pokemon, and Psychic, Dark Pokemon, so you can play those super effectives by having completely immune Pokemon on your team, which works out pretty well. Also, looking at the stat breakdown, Poison doesn't really fare too well. I mean, everything is 10th place or below for the base stat averages of fully evolved Pokemon, and we are near the bottom at 16th place out of 18 typings for a base stat total, so it doesn't look too fantastic just for overall stat distribution. However, when we look at it, we're going to see Mega Venusaur. That is the highest base stat total of any poison type Pokemon. We also do get a little bit of sweep out of our poison type Pokemon, looking at Pokemon like Gengar and Crobat very fast, which is kind of what pulls us up into that 10th place. So when we look at the breakdown, well, there's no legendaries. That kind of explains why the base stat total might be so bad and why we don't have many high base stat Pokemon. We have 0 legendaries for the typing. That's kind of crazy, and with Pokemon Sun and Moon, I don't know where we can get a theme of a legendary for Poison, but it would be nice to at least have one Poison Pokemon that's a legendary, and we break it down, 8% of Pokemon are the Poison typing. Being introduced in the 1st generation, it's still at 9th, so not really too many Poison types, but it's kind of in the middle, and we get pretty mundane stats because of it, and overall, the Poison type Pokemon are just very purple by design. So a lot of the poison type trivia is just going to come from one of its main moves, Toxic and just the poison status. Now Toxic never misses. Even if the opponent is Fly and Dig, Toxic will never miss if used by a poison type Pokemon. That's actually pretty insane. Also, it is technically a status move that can one-hit KO, because if it's been on the field for 16 turns, well, it increments damage, so then on that 16th turn, it will do a full OHKO, even though most Pokemon don't make it that far. Also, Toxic is the only poison TM from Generation 1, and poison-type Pokemon can't get poisoned themselves. Now, there was also an interesting interaction in the 1st generation. Poison type is super effective against Bug type, which would have actually given it a bit more super effective hits throughout the generations, but that was reverted. Same with Bug being super effective against Poison, they kind of balance each other out, and then that kind of went away, so that's what we have with that. Hopping into Pokemon Showdown, it's time for the top 10 Poison type Pokemon. Let's start off number 10, the wild card, Victreebel. Now, here's the thing, when we look at like a list of poison type Pokemon, it doesn't really feel like there's a huge amount. Like, that's it, and none of them super stand out as like overwhelmingly powerful Pokemon that are always going to do ridiculous. But then when we look at Victreebel, it's actually one of the highest sweeping potential Pokemon in the poison typing, mostly because of its chlorophyll ability. Sunny Day is active, Pokemon speed is doubled, also has really good base attack and special attack, 105 and 100, so it can play the mixed, and then you just slap on growth. So with growth, you're going to raise your attack and special attack by 2 in the sun. So if you get a whole sun dynamic going on, Victreebel gets good stab on those grass attacks and the poison attacks. You can run something, you know, like a Giga Drain into Sludge Bomb, or you can also have Power Whip into some kind of poison type attacks. You can also play up that mix really well, and then you can even run some really wacky stuff like the Weather Ball. I mean, it gets access to the Weather Ball, so in the sun you get the fire coverage. On top of that, Hidden Power Ice, the coverage comes through, and if it does get that speed boost while also carrying those boosted stats, Victreebel can become one of the strongest poison sweepers in the game. However, we don't really see it because it's not that ridiculous. Like, you still have to get set up while having fairly low defenses and special defenses. You need a whole team dynamic around it, but it can still do some really cool stuff if given the opportunity. That's why it's number 10. Now it's time to get on to number 9 with Muck. So Muck is actually really just filthy when you use it in battle. Also, literally, I mean, when you look at its design, it's actual filth, and I think it's actually a pretty cool design with how it just kind of flows into the battle. So we can also look at the abilities. I really like Poison Touch. Sticky Hold is also an option in some situations. I mean, you can't have your items knocked off, and that does work out. But Poison Touch does synergize with Power Up Punch. So you use Power Up Punch, and this is going to have a 30% chance to poison your opponent, while also a 100% chance to raise your attack. I like those odds. That sounds pretty good. And the cool thing about poison type Pokemon in general is you get to run the Black Sludge. So that allows you to actually run a Leftovers tank and a Poison tank on that Black Sludge. So there is some good synergies right here. And what makes Muck really powerful is access to the Minimize. So Minimize is going to make you difficult to hit. You have a decent amount of tankiness, like the defenses are pretty bad, but if you eat a physical Earthquake anyways, going to have some hard times, and there's some other things that you can kind of incorporate into your movesets. You know, you are going to have it to where Toxic won't miss if you use it. Instead of running Power Punch, you can just do like a stockpile into Toxic stall set with the Minimize, and that can get really difficult for the opponent. Now, the main problem behind Muck is it doesn't have any natural sustain. Like, you don't have Drain Punch, you don't have Recover, you don't have anything like that. I mean, even a lot of Pokemon get the Pain Split, so you will have to play that one out just right, and even then, like, you can go with Power Punch into Pain Split for, like, kind of setup and sustain while holding on to the Minimize, and then just go into Gunk Shots. Like, Gunk Shot, fortunately, has a huge amount of base power, so 120 stab on the 105 attack, you can still, like, full hit point invested, and then you actually don't even need attack investment. You know, you can kind of spread this around however you want. You want to make Muck the tank you need it to be. Set up a Minimize, get a Power Punch, and then two-shot people with Gunk Shot. Maybe find a Poison in there along the way, and then you can Pain Split back up. So Muck does have some really cool options right there. And now it's time to get on to number 8, which is going to be the Roserade. Roserade. It's held back by its speed. I do have to say that. But the 90 base speed, you know, you are kind of either going for a wall breaker on a choice specs, or you will have to scarf it to get the most out of it. And 125 special attack isn't huge, but this Pokemon can get some damage down. Also has the Technician ability, so this is where it starts getting dangerous. Because, okay, you go Technician into a Hidden Power. So, I mean, at least your hidden power coverage, generally you're going to see like the Ice, then you go into Stab, Sludge Bomb, and something else. Just plays around some really interesting kind of setup ideas, and it has a decent amount of coverage. I mean, the Extra Sensory, Dazzling Gleam, kind of add on to it, and it's more just a standard sweeper. I know I talk a lot about some of these Pokemon like Muck. I just talked about Muck for a long time, but Roserade, I would say it's a little more reliable, does have some power, can catch the opponent off guard and do some really powerful things, but sweeper, coverage, not really too much else to say. It works out. So let's go and talk about number 7 on this list. It's going to be Nidoking. I would say when it boils down between Nidoking and Roserade, Nidoking is just going to be better because that sheer force ability. So it can run physical or special. You are going to see more people running that special because of the way that the damage stacks. And it just does a lot of really crazy things. So this is a Pokemon that you can either run that Timid Nature, go for some pretty good wall breaking as well. You have to Scarf it, or you can even go for like a Life Orb. Because the cool thing about Sheer Force is if you have Life Orb, it's going to nullify the effect of the Life Orb, and you can also get that boosted damage while having amazing coverage. So Roserade has decent coverage. Nidoking, well, your Ice Beam is going to get that 30% boost from the Sheer Force, and also the 30% boost from a Life Orb. So, I mean, Ice Beam is absolutely ridiculous. Then you even get access to the Sludge Wave. So, higher base power than Sludge Bomb, doing ridiculous amounts of damage. Earth Power. A really good thing about Earth Power is that a lot of people, if they're anticipating like ground type attacks and trying to be physically defensive against it, you know, they're anticipating an Earthquake. Earth Power finds more damage against more Pokemon because generally there's a lower amount of special defense across all Pokemon, especially in tanks and stuff. There's a very high physical kind of meta, so people aren't really anticipating like ground type special hits. Earth Power does well, and then you get whatever other coverage you want. You want Surf, you've got Surf, because it's a Nidoking. Now, it isn't going to have the sheer force boosting, but I mean, you have all kinds of weird things that Nidoking can run, and that's just kind of what makes it so scary, that it's an amazing coverage sweeper, has insane amounts of damage. Like, you'll find these neutral Sludge Waves, like a neutral attack getting KOs pretty reliably on this Nidoking. You know, don't let that 85 special attack fool you. You're getting so much boosting on the sheer force, so much stab, so much craziness. It's just going to work out. And everything else you hit super, if you work around it, it's going to reward you more than a Roserade. But again, Roserade does do pretty well in some situations. Now let's go and talk about number 6. I'm putting Drapion right here. Now Drapion is such a brutal tank to stall with. It's an amazing Pokemon like that, and the weirdest thing about Drapion is that it doesn't get access to any sustain. Like, we've seen these other Pokemon, but Drapion doesn't even get the Pain Split. Its sustain is going to only be from, like, Black Sludge, and maybe if you have a Wish Pokemon on your team. Another thing that makes it good is that you can either Keen Eye to go against other Minimize or Evasion spammers, or you can also have the Battle Armor so you know exactly how much damage you're taking. Battle Armor, you can't be struck by a critical hit. Cool, you don't have to worry about sudden damage from a crit, you can kind of play everything out. Now, what makes Drapion really good is it gets a stab knockoff that kind of inflicts a good amount of damage, only 90 base attack, but you can kind of add on to that. It also does have the Toxic Stall, but then it gets the Acupressure. And here's where things start getting funny for the Drapion. So, if you go like full tank investment, you know, you can get a good amount of hit points in there, kind of stack onto the defenses and whatnot. It's going to be a very well-rounded tank, and you just kind of play that luck game, but some really scary things can happen. What Acupressure does is that it raises random stat of an ally or the user by 2. So in double battles, you can buff up another Pokemon, or in single battles, you know, you just use Acupressure. Hey, you can dice roll it. Oh man, what if you get a free effective minimize? You know, you gain evasion, or you get defenses against a physically attacking Pokemon. Something like that can start snowballing it. You can go for Toxic Stalls, and you even just want to run the Protect. So it's kind of a very classic Toxic Protect staller, but it can gain those surprising stats, and if everything goes just right, you can win out some battles, and I've seen some very nasty stalls, and effective sweeps from you know, you remove your opponent's item. So you knock off an item, say you don't want to deal with the Drapion, okay, they switch out, you get a Toxic on their Pokemon, you get a knockoff. Drapion isn't going to do like massive 1v9s and whatnot, but it is going to get enough effective damage across the team. A little bit here, status there, and then it removes items, while also potentially buffing itself or allies in double battles. It's pretty cool. I think people should respect the Drapion a bit more, and Berto swears by it, and he knows how to play this Pokemon. So it's all about the Drapion mastery. If you really get in that Pokemon's head, you know how to play it, it will be one of the most rewarding Poison-type Pokemon you can use, but very high technical skill, which is why it's only number 6. Number 5 is going to be the Mega Beedrill. So Beedrill getting a Mega was absolutely insane. We have one of the fastest Pokemon in the game with one of the highest attacks that gets adaptability and near perfect coverage. So the interesting thing about Beedrill is that you are going to have to play it perfectly. Like, you will need that safety on the Protect, and then you get other coverage. So do you want to get the knockoff for super effective coverage? Do you want to get the Drill Run? Again, for coverage, but at the same time, we are going to need our Dual Stab. So Dual Stab gives you a couple options. U-Turn, I'm not a big fan of. I would rather go for the highest damage possible on that X-Scissor. And then we also do get the Poison Jab. 30% chance to poison does have a nice little benefit to it. So here's Beedrill, you know, it's just a huge amount of damage that you go with the Adamant nature because you don't have to run Jolly with a 145 speed and you're going to outspeed everything. Your adaptability makes everything feel like a super effective hit, and it's going to clean up really well. If you get a super effective on the knockoff or just hit a really frail sweeper Pokemon, Beedrill does very well, and you can run it without the Protect. Now, this will require like your opponent being in the middle of a setup or having your own setup for it as well, and then Beedrill can do some cool things, and this will let you run the Drill Run and round out your coverage because, well, X is a Poison Jab, Steel-type Pokemon. Those are going to kind of wall you out. Drill Run's going to hit those rocks, hit those steels, hit those poison types, and then knockoff covers everything. So your coverage is going to be excellent with all this, and overall, very fast, very powerful sweeper. Does use up your Mega Slot, can be the most frail Pokemon ever. I mean, 40 defense, 65 hit points, neutral physical attacks will take this Pokemon out easily. Also has a lot of weaknesses. Even the special defense isn't that great. So it's the ultimate glass cannon. It is the perfect embodiment of a frail sweeper. High risk, high reward, but I do love the theory craft behind this Pokemon. One of the strongest poison types, which is why it's going to be number 5 on the list. And now let's go and look at number 4 on the list. This is where we start getting into the classic, alright, these are staple poison type Pokemon, Crobat. Now, Crobat's getting a lot of use effectively everywhere. That in double battles, it has, you know, tank stats that you, with the 80s across the board, you can invest into it a bit. You can outspeed your opponent, kind of get your own setup, find a little bit of damage and stuff like that. And it's going to be very powerful. Also, an interesting thing about Crobat is, say, let's go and take a Pokemon like Talonflame. Well, Talonflame is slower and has less offenses, so technically Crobat's just going to do more damage off of a Brave Bird. Now, true, Talonflame does have the Gale Wings ability, but just kind of shows that Crobat's damage is very, very surprising. So you can give a Life Orb for that for the damage. You have good Dual Stab right there, and again, we have Tailwind, so you can run that if you want to. Taunt, Quick Guard, it has the Inner Focus so it can't get flinched. This is the ultimate setup at Pokemon doubles. Even in singles, you just kind of bring it in and boom, you throw out high amounts of damage, or you can also go for something really silly. I've seen Curse White Herb. Curse White Herb, Crobat wants to sweep, you know, restores all lowered stat stages to 0 when less than. So what Curse is going to do is it's going to maintain your very high amount of speed. It's going to let you have that 90 on the attack, and then boom, now you're getting plus attack. It's going to be like a Choice Band, Talonflame's Brave Bird, and it's going to be on a 130 base speed Pokemon, and then you also have the Poison Stab and something else that you want to run into it. So Crobat is going to be a great Pokemon to use. It can also roost as well, so it does a lot of really weird things, and again, very staple, very solid Poison type Pokemon. Next up, let's go and look at the Gengar. Very strong Poison type Pokemon, very powerful Ghost as well. I mean, Gengar, Mega Gengar, they're kind of the same, like when it comes to the list, you know. Mega Gengar, it has its own bag of tricks. It can just get huge amounts of damage, really good amounts of speed. It's going to be able to keep up with the Crobat on its levels of speed. 170 on the base special attack on the Mega Gengar, fairly ridiculous, and it does have that Shadow Tag ability, so you can really match with your opponent really well, get them trapped in. You can run Perish Song sets, and like Shadow Tag Perish Song is so nasty. Because, okay, you just switch out on that last turn. So now your opponent can't switch, they die, Gengar's safe, it runs sub-disable, and it's super fast and very difficult to work around. Now, Ghost-type Pokemon can be freed from that. There are ways of getting around the Shadow Tag, which is why we can talk about the regular Gengar. And regular Gengar, it has Destiny Bond, so that's another thing that Gengar has up its sleeve, you know. If it's backed in a corner, it's going to use that Destiny Bond. If it's running the Focus Sash, what it likes to do is it likes to just convert KOs non-stop. You get good amounts of coverage here and there. It got the Dazzling Gleam, it runs the Shadow Ball, it can run Dark Pulse, it also has the Sludge Bomb and Sludge Wave if you are running the event one as well. Energy Ball, so it can kind of mix it up with what it hits super effective. I mean, I've seen Thunderbolt, you can see all kind of other things, like even the Psychic on it, so it can match up against other Poison-type Pokemon really well. So what it wants to do is it wants to find the coverage to 8 KO your opponent throughout the Destiny Bond, and in some situations in the late game, if just faster than the rest of your opponent's Pokemon and they're around half or lower, Gengar just wins. It just comes in and wins. Also, there are like stally kind of Gengar sets. Throws up a fast sub, gets the Will-O-Wisp out there, chips you away with the Shadow Ball. Very high utility Pokemon. Good sweeper, classic, just really powerful. You don't know what it's going to do. It's very hard to predict, a very hard Pokemon to read, and that's why it's going to be number 3 on the list, but it will have to be passed by the Scolipede. Scolipede, my goodness, this Pokemon getting speed boost. It's a somewhat tanky speed boost Pokemon as well, so what you want to do is you set up the Protect, and then the game is yours. You get Swords Dance, so Swords Dance Protect into that Baton Pass, and you can even set up a substitute with it, or you can even let Scolipede sweep on its own. That what it has is a 100 attack. So you protect, you sub, you let your opponent kind of do their thing, you get a Swords Dance for yourself. Forget about the baton passing, that's where you just go for like Poison Jab, and if you run it really well, you know, if you're using Scolipede as a lead, you just kind of play out against your opponent's lead Pokemon as well. Oh, they're going to be going for Stealth Rock, Sticky Web. They want their own setup for themselves, well, you get a free substitute, and then you get a Swords Dance, and then they try to break it, you protect, you're faster than their team, Poison Jab does ridiculous amounts of damage with the Life Orb, and hey, your Scolipede's safe and one-shotting everything. That works out. It also has the Iron Defense. Now, this is one of the really crazy parts about it, that so you protect, and then if you're going up against a physical attacker that's trying to break you, well, now you're faster than them, you get the Iron Defense, they're doing half damage, and then you can baton pass that Iron Defense as well, depending on like how follow through your Scolipede is. You know, sometimes you run damage on it, sometimes you don't, just depending on how you want to follow through on that Scolipede. It's just a Swords Dance Baton Passer with speed boost. Like, there's not much else you need to know. One of the more reliable Pokemon that can do it. It's just absolutely ridiculous, and it can make any Pokemon on your team turn into an effective sweeper under the right situations. Well, any physical Pokemon. So that's how it is. Now it's time for the honorable mentions. Honorable mentions I'm going to give to Dragalge. Now Dragalge, another adaptability, awesome poison type Pokemon. It does get the Dragon Pulse, Draco Meteor, so it does ridiculous amounts of damage. It just very poor speed, so it has to take a hit. Decent on that special defense, or I mean, it's a decent special defense tank. It's really good on special defense, but bad on the hit points. So it has to take a hit, and then it like returns a one-shot Draco Meteor back. Kind of limited what it does. Assault Vest Dragalge can be a very solid special defense tank, but then you're looking for 2-hit KOs while trying to not get 3-hit KO'd in return since you're so slow. It can work. I've seen it work. There's a lot of setup opportunities for this Pokemon. It can do a lot of really cool things, but it's not super reliable. It's not super sweeper. And let's go and look at Weezing as the last honorable mention. Weezing, I feel, is very similar to Muck it does different things in different ways. Like, Weezing is an unholy physical tank. Like, it throws out the Will-O-Wisp, it can just kind of burn a lot of Pokemon, it has Pain Split, it can sustain up. It just doesn't have a lot of damage follow through. It can clear Smog your opponent if they're setting up too much, it can Destiny Bond. So it's more of a very disruptive Pokemon, and its effective gain isn't as high as something like Drapion or something like a Muck, but at the same time it can wall out entire teams, so it is worth a mention. That is fairly honorable. And let's talk about the number 1 Poison-type Pokemon. If you haven't seen it on this list, you know it's coming. It's going to be the Amoonguss. Ugh. This Pokemon. So brutal. So, it has the Regenerator ability. Getting Regenerator as a hidden ability makes it the ultimate tank pivot. That as long as you know it's not eating a super effective hit, you just switch into it, eat the hit, and then you can do whatever you want. You have Spore, so you put that Pokemon to sleep, you switch out, you gain a third of your health back, and then you go into another tank, and you can effectively kind of cycle stall through a ton of your opponent's team. Also, it works out so well in so many different formats. In Double Battles, you have the Rage Powder, so everything has to hit this super tanky Pokemon that isn't going to care about this damage. It's getting Spores across in singles, Spores across in doubles. It also has Synthesis, so if it takes any damage, it can shrug this off. Look at those hit points, 114 on those hit points. So what you want to do is you want to kind of go like high amounts of special defense, high amounts of defense, and then kind of round it off with some hit points, and then whatever nature you want. And now this thing's going to tank out anything. Also, it's one of the best special defense tanks in the game. Max out hit points, max out special defense. You give it some kind of nature that you want like that. Sassy can kind of work if you're going for anti-Trick Room in a way, if you're trying to underspeed Pokemon. Also, if you're running the Calm nature, you're going to take less from a foul play, so just in case in those odd situations your opponent's trying to hit you with that. But overall, it's just really ridiculous, and it's the anti-Fairy. Like, this comes in on a Hyper Voice, this comes in on any Fairy type attack, throws out Sludge Bomb, heals up. It's going to force Fairies out, so if you have any Dark type Pokemon on your team, Amoonguss is a staple. Anything weak against Fairies. Amoonguss is the glue against so many powerful threats, and its weaknesses are obvious. Alright, it's a Grass Poison type Pokemon, so if you see that Ice coming, you see the Fire, you see anything that's going to threaten like that, you just have other Pokemon that resist it. You have a Water type Pokemon on your team. You have a Dark type Pokemon on your team. As we mentioned before, it's just amazing. Like, Amoonguss is, as much as everyone spams it, as much as it's an annoying Pokemon to deal with, and it's annoying to use as well, it's the best Poison type Pokemon in the game. It's too good. One of the few Pokemon to get Spore. 100% sleep chance. Not many things have that. Spore's the only one. You know, we have Hypnosis at 60% accuracy, Sleep Powder at 75%, Dark Void at 80%. Spore's going to do this, and it's on one of the tankiest, most disgusting Pokemon that can eat super effective hits like it's nothing. Like a super effective special type attack. Doesn't do anything to this guy. Synthesis up, switch out on the Regenerator, come into a better Pokemon deal with situation. I can talk about how Amoonguss just works all day long, which is why it's number 1 on the list of Poison-type Pokemon. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you all have a nice day. Thank you very much for watching.